It was a Tuesday in July, one of those scorching Georgia summer days where the heat rises from the asphalt in visible waves, the kind of day where tempers run as hot as the pavement. I've been coming to Rosie's for nearly 8 years now, and I've seen my fair share of characters come through those doors. But what happened that day is something I'll never forget. The morning rush had died down, and only a handful of regulars remained, nursing their coffee and picking at the remains of their breakfast. The bell above the door chimed, and in rolled Frank Cooper, right on schedule. Frank was a fixture at Rosie's, a Vietnam veteran in his early 70s, confined to a wheelchair after losing both legs in the war. Despite everything he'd been through, Frank always had a smile on his weathered face and a kind word for everyone he met. Sarah, the waitress, called out to him. "Morning, Frank," she said, already pouring his usual black coffee, no sugar. "Morning, Sarah," he replied, wheeling himself to his regular table by the window. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" That was Frank, always seeing the beauty in things, even when the thermometer was pushing 100 degrees before noon. Sarah brought over his coffee and took his order. The same as always, 2 eggs over easy, rye toast, and a side of bacon. As she turned to put in his order, the bell chimed again. This time, 5 men in leather vests entered, their boots heavy on the linoleum floor. I recognized the patches on their vests. They belonged to the Steel Serpents, a motorcycle club that had been causing trouble around town lately. Not one of the respected clubs with veterans and community service. These guys were different. They had a reputation for drugs, intimidation, and violence. The atmosphere in the diner immediately changed. Conversations quieted, and I noticed several of the regulars shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The bikers took a booth in the corner, laughing loudly and making crude jokes. Sarah took a deep breath and approached their table. "Welcome to Rosie's. Can I get you gentlemen something to drink?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The largest of the group, a hulking man with a shaved head and a thick beard streaked with gray, looked her up and down in a way that made my blood boil. "5 coffees, sweetheart," he said, his voice raspy from years of cigarettes. "And make it quick." She nodded and hurried back to the counter, and I could see the discomfort on her face. As she poured their coffees, I glanced over at Frank, who was quietly reading his newspaper, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the room. When Sarah returned with their coffees, the bikers ordered their food. Everything with extra bacon, extra cheese, and make it snappy. She wrote it all down and headed to the kitchen, clearly grateful to escape their leering gazes for a moment. As she waited for their orders, Sarah checked on Frank and her other tables. Everyone seemed on edge, eating quickly and speaking in hushed tones. No one wanted trouble, especially not with Frank there. He was beloved in our community, a gentle soul who had already endured more than his fair share of hardship. The cook called out that Frank's order was ready, and Sarah delivered it to his table, setting the plate down with a smile. "There you go, Frank. Just the way you like it." "Thank you, Sarah," he said, folding his newspaper neatly beside his plate. "You know, my daughter's coming into town this weekend. First time I'll see my grandbaby." Whoops! His face lit up as he talked about his family, and I couldn't help but smile from my spot at the counter. That's when I noticed one of the bikers, a younger man with tattoos covering his neck and hands, watching them, a sneer on his face. I tried to ignore him and focused on finishing my coffee instead, but I kept an ear in their conversation. "That's wonderful. How old is your granddaughter now?" Sarah asked Frank. 6 months, Frank beamed, pulling out his phone to show her a photo. "Look at her. Isn't she beautiful?" Before Sarah could respond, a harsh voice cut through their conversation. "Hey, old man," the tattooed biker called out. "Nobody wants to hear about your family. Keep it down, will ya?" The diner fell silent. Frank looked up, surprised, then turned back to Sarah with an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that," he said quietly, tucking his phone away. "You have nothing to apologize for, Frank," Sarah assured him, loud enough for the biker to hear. Then she turned and walked back to the counter, her face flushed with anger. A few minutes later, the cook called out the bikers' orders, and Sarah delivered their food without making eye contact. She was hoping they would eat quickly and leave, but it seemed they were in no hurry. They continued to be loud and obnoxious, making crude comments every time she walked by. Frank finished his breakfast and asked for the check. Sarah brought it over, along with a refill of coffee. "On the house," she said, nodding toward the coffee. "And don't mind them. They're just passing through." Frank nodded, his eyes twinkling. "I've dealt with worse, Sarah. Much worse." He paid his bill, leaving his usual generous tip, and wheeled himself toward the door. As he passed the biker's table, the tattooed man stuck out his boot, catching the wheel of Frank's wheelchair. Frank lurched forward, nearly falling out of his chair. "Oops," the biker said, feigning innocence. "Didn't see you there, cripple." His companion snickered and my blood ran cold. I half rose from my seat, but Frank held up his hand, stopping me and Sarah, who had also started toward them. "It's all right," he said calmly. "No harm done." He continued toward the door, his dignity intact. But the biker wasn't finished. "Yeah, roll away," he called after Frank. "Bet you wish you'd rolled away from those bullets too, huh?" Frank stopped, his hand on the door. For a moment I thought he might respond, but he simply pushed the door open and wheeled himself outside. The biker turned to his friends, laughing. "These vets think they're something special because they got themselves blown up. My tax dollars paying for his free ride." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The cook, Mike, emerged from the kitchen, his face red with anger. "That's enough," Mike said, his voice low and dangerous. "You need to leave, now." The leader of the group stood up, towering over Mike. "We'll leave when we're good and ready. We paid for our food, and we're gonna eat it." Mike looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew he was outnumbered. He retreated to the kitchen, muttering under his breath. I left some cash on the counter for my coffee and moved to a table near the window. Through it, I could see Frank sitting in his wheelchair in the parking lot, talking on his phone. The sun gleamed off the medals pinned to his vest, a purple heart, a bronze star, silent testimonies to his courage and sacrifice. The bikers took their time finishing their meal, clearly enjoying the discomfort they were causing. When they finally asked for their check, Sarah brought it over quickly, wanting them gone as soon as possible. The tattooed man examined the bill, then slapped down some cash. "Keep the change, sweetheart," he said with a wink. "Maybe next time we can get to know each other better." She didn't respond, just took the money and walked away. They stood up, adjusting their vests and laughing among themselves. As they headed for the door, we all breathed a sigh of relief. But our relief was short-lived. Through the window, I saw Frank still sitting in his wheelchair near the entrance. I realized with horror that he was waiting for the paratransit service that would take him home, and he would have to face the bikers again. The steel serpents burst through the door into the parking lot, immediately noticing Frank. The tattooed biker nudged his friends, and they altered their course, heading straight for him. I moved closer to the window, my heart pounding. "Still here, old-timer?" the tattooed man said, circling Frank like a shark. "Waiting for your special bus?" Frank looked up, his face impassive. "Just waiting for my ride, son." "Don't call me son," the biker snapped. "I ain't your son." "No," Frank agreed quietly. "You're not. My son knew respect." The biker's face flushed with anger. He leaned down, getting right in Frank's face. "You think you deserve respect because you got your legs blown off? You're just another baby killer who went to Nam. Nobody cares about your service. Nobody cares about your sacrifice." I was moving toward the door, ready to intervene, when I saw Frank's expression change. Not to anger, as I expected, but to pity. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Frank said. "I hope someday you find peace." That's when it happened. The biker's face contorted with rage, and he spat directly into Frank's face. The glob of saliva dripped down Frank's cheek as the bikers erupted in laughter. I gasped, along with several customers who had gathered at the window. This was beyond disrespect. It was assault. I burst through the door, napkins in hand, but before I could reach Frank, he wiped his face with a handkerchief from his pocket. "You should leave now," Frank said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel I'd never heard before. "That was a mistake." The biker mock bowed. "Oh, I'm so scared. What are you gonna do? Roll over my foot?" His friends laughed again, but their laughter seemed forced, as if they were realizing their companion had crossed a line. "It's not what I'm going to do," Frank replied, folding his handkerchief and returning it to his pocket. "It's what they're going to do." He nodded toward the street where he'd been looking while on his phone. The bikers turned, their smiles fading. "Who? Your imaginary friends?" the tattooed man scoffed, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Frank didn't respond. He just checked his watch. I approached with the napkins, but Frank waved me away with a small smile. "It's all right. Go back inside. This will be over soon." Something in his tone made me listen. I retreated to the doorway but remained watching, along with nearly everyone from the diner. The bikers, attempting to reclaim their bravado, laughed it off and headed toward their motorcycles parked at the far end of the lot. The tattooed man turned back once to give Frank the middle finger. "See you around, cripple?" he called out. Frank just nodded. "Sooner than you think." About 20 minutes passed. The bikers had moved to their motorcycles but seemed to be in no hurry to leave, drinking from flasks and smoking cigarettes. Frank remained where he was, occasionally checking his watch. Then we heard it. The rumble of engines. Lots of them, growing louder by the second. The bikers heard it too, looking up with confusion. Around the corner came a convoy of at least 30 motorcycles, led by a rider on a massive black Harley with Marine Corps insignia emblazoned on the gas tank. Behind him rode men and women of various ages, all with military precision in their formation. Many wore vests identifying them as members of the Veteran Riders Alliance, a respected motorcycle club composed entirely of former military personnel. They flooded into the parking lot, surrounding the 5 steel serpents in a wide circle, engines growling. The leader cut his engine and dismounted, removing his helmet to reveal a man in his 50s with a high and tight haircut that screamed, "Marine." His vest was adorned with patches indicating service in Iraq and Afghanistan, along with the rank of gunnery sergeant. He walked directly to Frank, snapped to attention, and saluted. "Sergeant Major Cooper, the cavalry has arrived, sir." Frank returned the salute. "At ease, Gunny Martinez. Thank you for coming so quickly." The Marine nodded, then turned to face the steel serpents, who were now looking decidedly uncomfortable. The tattooed man tried to maintain his tough facade, but his eyes darted nervously around the encircling veterans. "Which one?" Gunny Martinez asked. Frank pointed to the tattooed biker. "That one. Thought it would be amusing to spit on a Medal of Honor recipient." A murmur went through the crowd of veterans. I gasped. I knew Frank had served with distinction, but I had no idea he'd received our nation's highest military honor. Martinez's face hardened. He walked over to the tattooed biker, who had gone pale beneath his ink. "You spit on this man?" Martinez asked, his voice deceptively quiet. "Listen, man, we don't want any trouble," the biker began, backing up until he hit his motorcycle. "You should have thought about that before you disrespected a war hero," Martinez replied. "Do you have any idea who that is? That's Sergeant Major Franklin Cooper. He lost his legs pulling 3 of his men to safety under enemy fire in Vietnam. He returned to the field of fire 3 times despite his wounds. He saved 14 lives that day. The tattooed man swallowed hard, looking around at the stone-faced veterans surrounding him. "I didn't know," he started. "And that makes it okay?" Martinez cut him off. "It's okay to spit on a disabled veteran as long as he doesn't have a Medal of Honor. Is that what you're saying?" The biker's friends had begun to edge away from him, clearly wanting no part of what was coming. "Look, I'm sorry, okay?" the tattooed man said, his earlier bravado completely gone. "I was just messing around." Martinez stepped closer, towering over the biker. "You call that messing around? Where I come from, spitting on someone is assault. Spitting on a decorated veteran is also incredibly stupid." By now, a small crowd had gathered from neighboring businesses, watching the confrontation unfold. Someone had called the police, and I could hear sirens in the distance. "What are you gonna do?" the biker asked, a tremor in his voice. "Beat me up? 30 against 5? That's real brave." Martinez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We're not going to touch you. We're not criminals like you and your friends. We served this country to protect even people like you. People who don't deserve it." He turned to the crowd of veterans. "Phone cameras out. Document everything." Dozens of phones emerged, recording the scene from every angle. "Here's what's going to happen," Martinez continued, turning back to the biker. "You're going to apologize to Sergeant Major Cooper. You're going to do it on your knees, where you belong. And all these fine people are going to record it, so whenever someone searches for the Steel Serpents online, they'll see what kind of men you really are." The biker's face flushed with anger and humiliation. "I'm not getting on my knees for anybody." "That's your choice," Martinez said with a shrug. "But I should mention that several of us here are lawyers. Sergeant Jackson over there specializes in civil suits. Spitting on someone is assault and battery. Sergeant Major Cooper would have an excellent case against you. And from the looks of your bikes and your clothes, I'm guessing the Steel Serpents have assets that could be seized to pay damages." The biker glanced at his friends, looking for support, but they had backed away, leaving him isolated. "Additionally," Martinez continued, "I recognize those colors you're wearing. The real Steel Serpents are based out of Tucson, and they don't take kindly to posers wearing their patches without permission. I have their president on speed dial. Should I let him know about this situation?" The blood drained from the biker's face. Wearing another club's colors without permission was a serious offense in motorcycle club culture, often met with extreme violence. The police sirens were getting closer. The biker looked around desperately, then back at Martinez. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll apologize." "On your knees," Martinez repeated, his voice like iron. With cameras recording from every angle, the biker walked slowly toward Frank's wheelchair and sank to his knees on the hot asphalt. I'm sorry for what I did," he said, his voice barely audible. "Louder," Martinez commanded, "so everyone can hear you." The biker cleared his throat. "I'm sorry for disrespecting you, sir. I'm sorry I spit on you. It was wrong, and I apologize." Frank looked down at the man, his eyes filled not with triumph, but with compassion. "I accept your apology," Frank said quietly. "And I hope you learn from this. Not about consequences, but about respect, about honor. Those aren't just words. They're how we live our lives." The tattooed biker nodded, unable to meet Frank's gaze. "Now stand up," Frank continued. "No man should stay on his knees any longer than necessary." The biker rose, his face burning with shame. Martinez stepped forward again. "You and your friends are going to leave now," he said. "And if we ever hear about you disrespecting another veteran, or anyone else, we'll be back. And next time, an apology won't be enough. Understood?" The biker nodded quickly. "I can't hear you," Martinez barked. "Yes, sir. Understood," the biker replied. "Good. Now get out of here." The 5 steel serpents mounted their motorcycles and roared out of the parking lot just as 2 police cruisers pulled in. Martinez walked over to speak with the officers, explaining the situation. After a brief discussion, the police took statements from several witnesses, including me. Meanwhile, the veterans had gathered around Frank, sharing stories and jokes as if they were at a reunion. Frank was transformed, laughing and animated in a way I'd never seen before. These were his people. They understood him in a way that civilians like me never could, no matter how much we respected his service. Later, after the police had left and most of the veterans had gone, Frank wheeled over to where I stood by the diner's entrance. "Sorry for all the excitement," he said with a smile. "Don't apologize," I replied. "That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen." "But Frank, you never told me you received the Medal of Honor." He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "It's not something I advertise. What happened that day? It wasn't about medals. It was about bringing my boys home." Gunny Martinez approached, resting a hand on Frank's shoulder. "Sergeant Major here saved my father's life in Vietnam. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't exist. None of my children would exist. That's the thing about heroes. Their actions echo through generations." Frank waved away the praise. "We all did what we had to do. No one special." "Speak for yourself, sir," Martinez grinned. "Some of us are very special." They both laughed, sharing a moment of camaraderie that transcended the decades between their service. Martinez turned to me. "Thank you for looking out for him. Not everyone does." "It's my honor," I said, and meant it. As Martinez walked back to his motorcycle, I looked down at Frank. "Will they really post those videos online?" Frank chuckled. "Probably not. That was just to scare him. Marines can be very persuasive when they want to be." "So this was all for show?" I asked, surprised. "The apology was real enough," Frank replied. "And the lesson, I hope. Sometimes people just need to be reminded of what respect looks like." I nodded, still processing everything I'd witnessed. "You know," Frank continued, "I've seen the worst of humanity. In war, and sometimes here at home. But days like today remind me that I've also seen the best. The brotherhood and sisterhood of those who served. It never goes away. We take care of our own." Just then, the paratransit van pulled into the parking lot. Frank sighed. "Finally, my chariot awaits." As I helped him toward the van, I noticed that Martinez and a few other veterans had remained behind, watching to make sure Frank got safely on his way. "See you tomorrow, Frank?" I asked as the driver deployed the wheelchair lift. "Same time, same place," he confirmed with a smile. "Coffee black, no sugar." As the van pulled away, Martinez approached me one last time. "He comes here often?" "Every morning," I nodded. "He's a regular." "Good to know," Martinez said thoughtfully. "Very good to know." The next morning, I arrived at Rosie's to find 3 veterans in Marine Corps hats, already seated at the counter drinking coffee. At Frank's usual table by the window sat Gunny Martinez himself, reading a newspaper. When Frank wheeled in at his usual time, his face broke into a wide grin at the sight of his brothers in arms. "What's all this?" he asked as Martinez stood to greet him. "Just getting some breakfast," Martinez replied innocently. "Heard they have good coffee here. Black, no sugar, right?" From that day on, Frank was never alone at Rosie's again. Different veterans would show up each day, sometimes 1, or sometimes 5. But always someone was there, sharing coffee and stories with the quiet hero by the window. And if new customers ever showed disrespect, well, they quickly learned that in this diner, respect wasn't just expected, it was enforced. The Steel Serpents never returned to Rosie's diner. But the real motorcycle club from Tucson heard about what happened. 6 months later, they organized a charity ride in Frank's honor, raising thousands of dollars for disabled veterans. The tattooed biker who had spat on Frank showed up for the ride, not as a steel serpent, but as himself, and contributed more than anyone else. Sometimes, the most important battles our veterans fight aren't on foreign soil, but right here at home. And sometimes, the greatest victories aren't won with weapons, but with brotherhood, honor, and a stubborn refusal to let disrespect stand. As for me, I'll never forget that day, or the lesson it taught me. Respect isn't just given to those who deserve it. Sometimes it must be demanded for them by those who understand its true value. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to Honor Echoes. Each week we bring you powerful stories of veterans and the unbreakable bonds formed through service. Hit that subscribe button now and join our community that honors those who've sacrificed for our freedom. Until next time, remember, respect isn't just a word, it's a way of life.